everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença and today I'm going to talk about React. If you want to get all the solutions of CS50 and also an ebook about how to become a developer as fast as possible, click on the description below. So we're going to do the solo learn about React and Redux, and I think this video is going to take a while, but stay with me and we're going to complete this course, okay? So the first part is, what is a front-end development? So a front-end development refers to what the end user, also commonly referred to as the client, can see. In the most basic forms, front-end development consists on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We have a video about HTML, you can search in our channel, and in the next week we're going to have the CSS, okay? As a developer, you will find that it's very easy for your front-end website, web application to become very complex and have a lot of different moving parts. It makes solving problems much more difficult when you have to go through a maze of code to find the issue. Eventually, developers decide that there must be a better way to manage all of that code, so they created libraries that could make life easier. React was one of those libraries. So let's see. And React is one of the most used front-end development in our time now. So React was developed by Facebook. Okay? Why React? React is one of the most popular JavaScript libraries for front-end web application. Here are some of advantages of React. So we can see, you can read this better when you're doing this course, but now I'm going to read just a little. So the advantages are speed, because interactive websites need to update the document object model each time a change happens. So if you change something in your code, it's really easy to do this in React. Ease of use. React allows developers to group related code together, and support, because there is a large community using this, and it's open source, which is very important. So what does DOM stand for? So DOM is a document object model. The first questions are pretty straightforward, so it's kind of easy now for us. Adding React. So React can be added to a website without any special tools or installations. First, we need to add the React library as two script tags to the head of our HTML document. So remember, in the Learn HTML in 2 hours, I explained that when we want to add things in our website, that like documentations from Bootstrap or JavaScript, we have to put these things in the head part. So these are some lines of code that you have to use if you want to use React, okay? Next, we need to add another script to enable the use of Jsx. Jsx is a syntax extension to JavaScript, and it's recommended to be used with React. Don't worry, we will learn more about and blah blah blah. So this is more for you know how to use React in your code. So where is the HTML document should you put the script tag? Where? So remember, in the HTML we have the head and the body, so we have to put in the head, okay? After adding the required script tags, we can start building our React app. We add a container that will be used to display something using React. So when we want to use React, we have to put a container or another name in a div, and this ID will be the one that we're going to use in the React code to explain, for the code, you have to do what I'm telling you in the div with the ID called container, okay? So now it's time for our first React code. Let's display a simple message as a heading. Let's try. So in here, we're using the HTML part, okay? We put here in the head the script to turn it able to use the React. And here we say in the body the div with the ID container, and we see here we put nothing, because in here when we use the React, we get element by ID, and here we are calling container. So this is going to appear inside this div here, okay? So let's run. So if we see the code, we are calling the div, and this part of the React, we are saying to render hello React. So we're going to see in our page just hello React, okay? Okay, so let's come back. Let's continue. So fill in the blank to create a div element with the ID root. This is more HTML, so here we use the div, and the container, it's called with the ID root. Okay, let's check and continue. Create React app. So in the previous lessons, we learned how to add React to a simple HTML document using the script tags. However, real web apps have a different scale, contain multiple files, use third-party libraries. So Facebook has created a handy tool called Create React App that makes it easy to set up a React project. So here it's more about how to install the React library in your VS Code, for example. So I'm going to pass this part because I think you can do this by yourself. So we do these things that they explain, and we'll install our required dependencies, configure and start the project on this part here. So when we click, it's going to open a new page here, and it's where we're going to see our application. This is the default output of our project in the browser. Okay. Drag and drop the commands to create a new React app named context and start it. So npx create React app, and the name of the app, that it's contacts, cd contacts. So we're putting our terminal inside the part called contacts. It's the folder, and in here we use npm start. Okay. Project structure. So let's explore the structure of our project by opening it using a code editor. We will be using Visual Studio Code, VS Code, in our example, but you're free to use any code editor. And I also think that instead of you using VS Code by now, you can use the Blitz stack, that it's a website they suggest us to use when we are learning React in this course here. So the public folder contains files related to how the application will display on the client, the most important of those being index.html, which is the HTML template of our page. Okay, so we create in this folder the index.html. The source folder contains all of the JavaScript, CSS, and image files that will be compiled into a bundle file and injected into index.html. So everything we're going to use in HTML, we're going to put in the source folder. Okay. So how is React compiled? It uses what it calls a file loader. In the case of Create React App, Webpack is used. And things that you can read later. But basically we create two files. The index.js, this file is the entry point into our application. In our code, a method called react-dom.render is used to find an element with ID root in the HTML and add our React application side of the element. It's what we saw in the previous example. And app.js, this file is the main component that will be rendered to the DOM, which currently includes the React logo image and the default text that we see in the output. You're going to understand better while we do this course, so by now just get a little bit familiar with what we're doing. So in the public folder, we put the index.html, remember, and everything we're going to use in this index.html we put in the source file folder. So here we are using the index.js and index.css. Okay? Changing the output. Now, when we know how to create and run a React project, let's change the default output to a simple hello message. So to do that, we need to open the index.js and change the code to the following. So React DOM render, it's the function that's going to render what we want. You put the h1 because it's the, remember this is a HTML tag, so here you put the tag that you want in the HTML and the message you want to put. So here we want to say hello, so we're using h1, and then we have to put document.getElementById. So this getElementById is going to get the element by ID in the HTML. So remember, in the HTML we have the div called with the ID called root. So in this case we're calling the root again. So this is going to be rendered in the div with ID root. Okay, and this is the output. We already saw this. Okay, so fill in the blanks to output. I'm learning React in the element with ID test. So remember, React DOM.render. I'm learning React, document get element by ID, the ID is test. Check. Perfect. So this is the stack blitz that I think I speak in the in a different way. So it's not blitz stack, it's stack blitz. It's a web page we can do our code, and we're going to use in this course. Okay, so later you can click on this link and you're going to see better the website. And here they are just explaining that they already put the index.html, the index.js, the CSS, and the package.johnson. So which of the following files represents the entry point of the React application? So the entry point we are going to using the index.js. Okay? It's where we write our code. So course project. Throughout this course, we will help you practice and create your own contact manager app using React. It's like a to-do app. So you will retain what you've learned and be able to put it to use. Our contact manager will allow you to view the list of contacts and add new ones to the list. So it's basically a to-do. Okay? Here we have a form, and here it displays the contacts that you already include in this form. Rearrange the code to output React rocks. So remember, the function that is going to render is the React DOM.render. Then you have to use the HTML tag and put your message, and then you have to use the document.getElementById to call the where you're going to include this message in your HTML. And here we are calling again the div with ID root. Okay. Remember, this is something that normally makes a bug in your code, so don't forget to use the semicolon after when you're closing a function or when you're writing a const and these things. You're going to get used to use the semicolon. So, which of the following bundling tools does create React app use? So it's Webpack. Okay. this is something more about things they explained before. So which folder does the index.html file live in? Remember, it's the public, and in the source we use the what things are it's going to be used in the index.html. React DOM render is which of the following? It's a method containing 3 arguments used to retrieve an element of ID root from the CSS file. So remember, this element of ID it's from the HTML file, used to add the React application inside the element. This is the right one. To see the list of project dependencies, we need to go to which file. So it's the package.json, okay? It's one of the things they put in the footer of one of the pages that we've passed. And I think I haven't spoken before, but now you know. Which of the following is the term that refers to your computer? So it's localhost, okay? Local because it's a local place you're using, and host because you're the host of the application, okay? Complete the code to output hey there in the element with ID root. So remember, the function is react DOM.render because we want to render. Here's the tag of HTML, the message, and then we use document.getElement by ID, and the ID is called root, okay? So fantastic, we've done the first part of our code. Now let's start React itself. So what is JSX? In the previous module, we used the following code to show an output using React. So we already saw this 1,000 times, okay? Let's start to break down the code and understand each part of it. We will start with the tag of HTML, okay? As you can see, the element is not in quotes to represent a string. It's like an HTML element. However, we use it right in the JavaScript code. This is called JSX, and it is a syntax extension to JavaScript. It allows us to build UI elements right in the JavaScript code. So rearrange the blocks to create a valid HTML element with the text. This is some content. So remember, in the HTML, normally we just use the tags and we put the text inside of these tags. So remember, the beginning of a tag has just the name, and in the end we have to use the /, okay, and the name. So let's check, that's it. So intro to JSX, let's have a look at our code again. The code recalls React's render method and passes 2 arguments, a JSX element and a container. The render method displays the provided element in the container, which in our case is an HTML element with ID root. Okay? I will just show you the stack blitz in order to see what I'm speaking. So in here, we have the index.html, the index.js, it's where we write our code, the CSS, and the package.json. Here we import the React and the CSS, and in here we use the function render. Here we can use other things that we learn in HTML course. So let's change to paragraph. You see? And then we have to use the document.getElement by ID, because in here, if we see in the index.js, we have this div with the ID root, and we have nothing here. We just have something appearing in our website because we are using the index.js, okay? Let's come back. Continue. So fill in the blanks to create a paragraph of text inside the container myText. So the container is ID myText here. So react.render, remember, here we are opening a paragraph, so here we close, and it's document.getElement by ID. Okay? We can use any JavaScript expression inside JSX using curly braces. So, for example, const name David. So the idea is we can use things, variables in our JSX by using the curly braces. Okay. So here we are declaring a name called David, and here we are declaring the element. This is important. We can also declare here a const with the element, the HTML element, and we call this const inside the React render. It's the same as if we put this in here. Okay. So the idea here is that instead of we putting here David, we use the name in curly braces, and here it will appear David. So when we render this, it's going to appear hello David. We can use this because sometimes we want to call different names. So instead of we creating a lot of functions rendering hello Giovanna, hello David, hello Rodrigo, we can just put hello name, and in name we can change these names. Okay. So what must JavaScript expressions be wrapped with to add them to the JSX curly braces? Okay. Attributes in JSX. We can specify attributes using quotes, just like in HTML. So in here, we can see we're giving an attribute using quotes. So this ID has name. When using a JavaScript expression as the attribute's value, the quotes should not be used. So when we are using an expression, it's the same idea as the previous explanation. If we're using something that we called before in the JavaScript, we use this as with curly braces. Okay. So fill in the blanks to use the value of x as the class name for the div element. So here, div class name. So here it's the same in HTML when we use class, but here we have to use class name because class has another meaning in JavaScript. So here we use class name. So here we have a value in the start in x. So we're going to use the curly braces to call this, and we have to close the div. Okay. When the JSX expressions are compiled, they are converted into JavaScript objects representing React elements. React then uses these elements to build the corresponding HTML DOM and displaying it in the browser. Let's create a counter app that increments a counter variable every second and displays it on the page as a paragraph. So let's try it on Stack Blitz. So here we have the variable counter that is initialized at 0, and the function is called show, and the idea is to increment the variable counter. So if it's 0, you're going to do +1, so it's 1, and then 1 + 1, 2, and so on and so forth. And then we were going to put this counter variable in a paragraph, and it's going to render this element here in the div. Okay, and this set interval show with 1000, it's to set a period of time that is going to increment this variable called counter. So in each 1000 microseconds, it's going to call the function show and increment this variable. Okay, so let's see. This is what I talked before. So fill in the blanks to call the calculate function every 5 seconds. So we use the function set interval. Calculate, it's the first input because we're calling the function, and then how many seconds you want this to change. Okay, Virtual DOM. We learned in the previous part that React updates only the elements that are necessary. This allows React apps to be much faster than apps built with other front-end technologies. But how does React archive? But how does React achieve that? React uses a virtual DOM, which is lightweight representation of the DOM. When an element gets changed, it is first updated in the virtual DOM. That process is fast as the virtual DOM is represented by simple objects. After that, React compares the virtual DOM to its previous state and only applies the DOM updates necessary to bring the DOM to the desired state. So DOM represents the page as a tree. Okay? Components. So components let you split the page into the independent and reusable parts. Let's visualize this by taking a look at a piece of the Solar Discussions page. So here we can separate into 3 components, and the heading component here, the new question button, and the search bar. It's another component here. This makes organizing the page leaps and bounds easier, but even more importantly, components allows us as the developers to separate concerns from one another. So you can separate of concerns, basically. You can read this more, but it's more about you understanding the concepts, okay? Which of the following is a design principle for dividing a computer program into distinct sections in order to address each component individually? So, separation of concerns. It's what we've talked before. In React, there are 2 types of components that can be used. Functional components and class components. Nowadays, it's more usual to use functional components. We're going to learn about class components, but it's important for us to focus more on functional components because it's the most used right now, okay? So in this part we will talk about functional components. A functional component is a simple JavaScript function. So this is a basic function. We are calling a function hello, and it returns h1 tag in HTML with just hello world. Okay, so it's very simple. Fill in the blanks to make this a usable functional component that returns a div element. So we have to call it as a function. We open a curly braces and we close here because we are creating a function. So everything that is inside the function is inside these curly braces. Okay. And inside of the parentheses, it's the input. But in this case, we're not having any input here. And we use the return because we want to return something in this function. Okay? Rendering components. In order to display the component, we need to create the corresponding JSX element. For example, for our user-defined component hello. So in here, we use the const L, this part here of hello. Now we can use our user-defined element and render it on the page. So for example, instead of us putting the function inside the React DOM render, in order to don't make our code looks bigger and we don't understand what's happening inside the render, we can separate into functions and we can call this function in a const. And to call this function in a const, we use this way here, okay, with the curly braces, and then forward slash closing the curly braces. Okay. Let's continue. So here, filling the blanks to define a component called section and render it on the page. So the function, it's called section. So here we have the function, okay, that is returning a div called a section. Here we are calling the function and storing it in a variable, and here we are going to render. The variable of our function is L, and if we check, okay, well done. Class components are typically used when there are more advanced user interactions like forms and animations. All class components need to extend the React.component class. So we always have to put this when we are calling a class component. We can rewrite our hello functional component as a class component. So class hello, instead of function hello, extends React.component, and then we render and return. It's basically the same idea, but just changes the way we are calling the class component. Okay, so I forgot. So we're calling a class component, so here we use class. Open this class component here, render, and return this. Okay, so in class components we don't use React dot render, because as we saw before, we are already called the render inside the class component. Okay, props. Function on components can accept arguments similar to JavaScript functions. These arguments are called props and represent an object, so are properties of these objects. For example, we can use props in our hello component. So we're calling here a component function called hello, and the input is a props. So return props.name, so we can add a name attribute to our element, where name is equals to David, and the attribute value will be passed to the component when rendered. So let's see here, just to not make this confused. So here it's the component function, okay, the hello, and in here name. The idea is like we're just using name in the previous example, but here we are using props, because in here we say const L equals hello, and here instead of props name we use name equals David. So when we use this here, the function understands that we are calling the function hello here, and in the props name we are going to use this argument here, because remember, this function call needs an input, and in this case this input is name equals David, and this name is called by name because in here we use props.name. Okay, and in here if I change to Giovanna, for example, it will render hello Giovanna. Okay, which is the output of the code? Function test props, so here it needs an input, return a paragraph A plus props.title. So const L here it's calling the function test, and the title is X, and in here it's going to appear A plus X. Okay, so it's this here. Okay, components using components. Components can use other components to generate an output. For example, function called app return a div, and this div has three the function app return a div that calls 3 times the function hello that has been explained before. So in this case we'll display hello David, hello James, hello Amy. Okay, so you can use a component in other components multiple times, and this is true. Okay, props in class components. Remember, this part of class is not so important. Focus on the on function components. Okay, so props can be accessed in class components using this .props. It's the same idea. In function component, we use just props dot something, and in this case we have to use this dot props dot something. Okay, this is the idea basically. Fill in the blanks to access the URL property of the props object in the class component. So here we are using a class. Remember, in function component we use props dot something, and here we use this dot props dot something. And in this case, something is the URL of the props. Okay, so if we check, we've done. An example, now that we know how to create components and pass them data, let's create a shopping list. Each item is our list. In our list, we'll have a name and a price. So the item name and price. The item component will render a simple div element with the data. So here it's the function component item that the input is that has an input the props, and return a div where name it's the props name, in this case cheese, and the price has the props price, in this case $4.99. Okay, now we can use our component and create multiple items for our shopping list. So we're calling this function component 3 times basically. Okay, how did we apply CSS to the item elements? So we use a CSS class. Okay, with class name. Remember, class name, not only class. Up until this point, we have learned how to pass data to components using props. Many web apps need their components to change their data, for example, after user interaction, clicking a button, submitting a form. However, props cannot be changed. Remember, props cannot be changed. In order to allow components to manage and change their data, React provides a feature called state. A state is an object that is added as a property in class components. So, for example, here, class component, we use hello. We call hello as a class component, and here we say state name James. It's the same idea as props, but instead of props we use state, and here we declare the value of the state. As you can see, state is just a simple object that contains key values pairs. Okay, similar to props, the values can be accessed using this .state. Now, when the component renders, the state is initialized with the given value, and there will be a heading that says "Hello James." Let's try it on Stack Blitz. So when we render this, okay, the thing that I just explained. So here it's hello this state.name. It's going to render hello James. Or not. It's taking a while. So it renders hello James as we expected. Okay, so let's continue. So class, it's a class component. We use person extends React component state, because we are declaring here state, age, blah blah blah. Let's check. Okay, perfect. Changing state. State should not be modified directly. Instead, React provides a setState method that can be used to modify state. For example, this dot setState. So if we're using this dot, we know it's a class component. So we set a state name James and age 25, you need to pass an object with the new key value pairs to the setState method. Why should we use setState instead of simply changing the values of the object properties directly? The answer is uncover one of the most useful features of React. When setState is called, React automatically re-renders the affected component with the new state. Usually the change in state happens in event handlers. We will look at an example in the next part. So remember, event handlers, for the ones that already know a little bit about JavaScript, can be the submitting, clicking in something, and etc. So drag and drop to change the value of the count property in the state to 42. So remember, we have to use the this because in this case we are using a class component, setState because we're setting a state, and the count here we want to set it as 42. Okay? Counter app. So to better understand how state works, let's create a counter app which increments the counter each time a button is clicked. So this is the event when the button is clicked. We start by creating our counter component, which includes the counter and a button. So we're going to try it on StackBlitz, but in here we create the class component, okay, and we set the state as 0. And then when we render, it will return in our page a paragraph with the value of the counter and a button that will be called increment. Okay? So every time we click the button, we'll increase the value of the state. And so in here we have initialized our counter to the value of 0, and this is the first part. But now we have to add a click event handler to the button and increment the counter in the state. So here's the final code. So I already explained. Here we initialize with 0, and here we create a function that is called increment. And in this function, this is the part inside of the function increment. We use this.setState, and as what will happen when we use this setState? The counter will change its value. So the counter, the variable counter, will be the value of the counter in that moment plus 1. So it's basically incrementing the value. And here we will appear in our web page a paragraph with the number of our counter variable and a button. In here we just have this button that did anything, but in here we use the onClick, that it's the event handler, and this onClick calls the increment function. Okay, so let's see how it works in our StackBlitz. So we already discussed this, okay? So every time we click, it will increment, okay? So if I click here, it will increment the value of counter. So when a component state is changed, the whole DOM of the page is reloaded. This is false. This is exactly why we use state, because it don't re-render the page, okay? So props versus state. As a recap, here is a summary of the main differences between props and state. If I were you, I would do a screenshot for you. Never forget the difference of these two concepts, because it's very important when you're when you're creating a React app. So we use props to pass data to components. Components use state to manage their data. Props are ready only and cannot be modified. State can be modified by its component. Use the setState method. The setState method results in a re-rendering the component affected. Okay. So the person component receives a name attribute using props. So remember, it's using props. fill in the blanks to use that value as its initial value for the name in the state. So in this case, we are initializing the state with the value of the props. So remember, this is a class component, so here we have to use this. And as we're initializing with a props, we have to put here props, okay? So hooks. Earlier version of React allowed to use state only with class component. In recent interactions of React, a new feature called hooks was introduced, allowing to use state inside the functional components. And this is the most used, as I talked a lot of times in this video before. First, we need to import the useState hook. So remember, we have to import React and useState from React library. UseState returns a pair, the current state value, and a function that lets you change the state. UseState takes one argument, which is the initial value of the state. So let's take a look on this example. When we are using useState, we have always to use this idea here, okay? So remember how it works. Hello world, so we're calling the function, so we're calling the function component, and we have to put here inside with these square brackets name and set name. Normally you can give any name here. If I wanted like Giovanna, here it has to be set Giovanna with a capital G, so here name, set name with a capital N, and then equals to useState, and here you put the value of your variable, okay? And here we return hello name, and it's going to return hello David. So I will just explain what I just said. You can give any name to your const, but it's a convention for you to put this name here and set the same name but with the capital, the first letter. So like if I put here set world, here has to be world with a capital W, okay? And here word. So if we see, it renders the same idea. Let's see. Fill in the blanks to define a state variable called count with an initial value of 42. So here the variable is called count, and here we see that set count, it's in here, so the name has to be count. We have to close the square brackets. Use state, and the initial value is 40, and the initial value is 42. Okay, so let's check. Nice. Counter app using hooks. Now we can rewrite our counter app from the previous lesson using a functional component and hooks. So here's the code. We initialize our counter as 0. In here we create a function increment that is going to increment our variable. So here we use the set counter and we do the increment counter plus 1. And here we return the div that will have the paragraph, the button with the event handler, and this is it. We already saw. I think it's easier to understand function component and it's less complicated, so I think this is one of the reasons why it's more used right now. Okay, so it's the same idea as the counter that we saw in the class component. So the useState hook can be used in class components. I think it's false. It's only in function component, because in class component we already have just the useState. We don't need the hooks. Lifecycle methods. So React provides special lifecycle methods for class components, which are called when components are mounted, updated, or unmounted. Mounting is the process when a component is rendered on the page. Unmounting is the process when a component is removed from the page. The component did mount method is called when a component is rendered on the page. For example, we can use component did mount in our counter app to set the initial value of the counter. So the component did mount. So when basically when our website is rendered, it's going to set the value as 42. So every time we reload the page, it's going to set as 42. For example, this is the same idea, the counter function that we explained. So let's increment, and when we reload the page, it's going to come back to 42, okay? Because this is the initial state, and with the component did mount, it's going to always return the initial value because we reloaded the page, okay? Given the code below, what will be the value of x after? So here we are calling the div 2 times the function component test and the class component test in this case. So the first time we are x is 0, and here we are incrementing 3 to x, and then we are calling again. So I believe it's going to be 6. Yes. I think I'm good at math. So let's see. Component did update. So another lifecycle method is component did update, which is called when a component is updated in the DOM. We can, for example, alert the current counter value when it's incremented. So this alert is that thing that appears here in this part of our website when the website wants to display some message for us. So, for example, alert number of clicks plus the value. Let's see. So it's the same idea of incrementing, just changing this alert part. So when we increment, it appears here, number of clicks, 1. Okay. Increment again, again we receive this alert. Okay. Drag and drop to create a component that logs the value of the name state variable when it gets updated. One thing that is important to see is that when we use console.log, when we open our console, we can see the variable changing. It's like when we use the developers tool. We have this console part, so when we are writing our code or debugging, we can see what's happening to the variable that we are using. So in this case, it's a class component. So we will drag class, state, name, task. Here we're calling a function. What's the name of the function? That log when it gets updated. So it's component did updated. Sorry. Okay, console.log. So in our console, it's going to appear the value, and in this case, we are updating a state, right? So here it's this.state.name. Okay, let's check. Perfect. The use effect hook. The lifecycle methods we covered are only available for class components. However, React provides a special hook called use effects to make lifecycle methods available in functional components. It combines the 3 lifecycle methods that we saw before in class components, and it combines all into one. For example, we can achieve the behavior of our last example using functional counter component. So this is the functional component. Okay, we already saw this. And instead of using what's the name? Component did update, we just use effect, and inside we use the alert. That's the difference. Okay. So remember, in class components, we can use these 3 lifecycle methods here, and we can use the state with any problems. And in the functional components, we have to use the hooks and the useEffect hook, okay? Basically, this is the idea that you want to pass. So in this case, fill in the blanks to import the required hooks to be able to use state and mimic lifecycle methods in functional components. So in here, we need to import, right? React, and in here we have to import useState and we have to import useEffect from the React library. Event handling. Handling event in React is very similar to handling events in the DOM. The only difference is that event names use camel case syntax and the event handlers needs to be passing curly braces. For example, to handle the click event on the button. So we just use onClick event equals to handle click, and clicking the button will call the handle click function of the component. Okay? Let's explore our counter. We already saw this. When we click, it calls the function increment and it's going to increment the value. We already saw this before, so I'm going to pass. What will be the text of the button after it's clicked 3 times? So the function toggle, const val, set val, use state on. Function, let's see what's the function toggle does. So if the value is on, it's going to turn as off. Otherwise, if it's off, it's going to turn it on. Okay? So if we click 3 times, the initial value is on. So for the first click, it's going to become off. The second click, if it's off, it's going to become on. And again, it's going to become off. So it's off. Okay? Handling user input. One of the common ways that users interact with web pages is through text fields. We can handle user input in React using the onChange event of the text field. When the value of the text field changes, the event handler is called, updating the value of the field in the component state. This way, you always have the actual value of the text field in the state. Let's make an app to convert km to miles, and we'll take the kilometer value from a text field and calculate the miles value upon input. Let's see on StackBlitz. So in this case, we are setting the const kilometer as 0. We have the function handle change, and in this case, the handle change will happen when the value when you change the text field. So when we write something in here, you see, this is the onChange. The function converts, so in here it's going to make the conversion of kilometer to miles, and in here we're just displaying. So we can write any number here, and it's going to instead change the value, because every time we change the text area, it's going to activate this handle change. Okay? So that's the idea. Continue. Fill in the blanks to call the doSomething function when the value of the text field changes. So input type text value val. In here we use the function onChange, and the name of the function will be doSomething. Okay? Forms. In the previous part, we learned how to handle user input in text fields. The text fields are usually part of the form. Similar to the previous example, React form elements keep their state and update it based on user input. This way you always have the data of your form at your disposal in this state. To demonstrate this, we will create a form that will add numbers every time the form is submitted and display the sum. Our form contains an input field and a submit button. So in this case, in our function add form, let's see in stack bits because I think it's better for us to see how it will be displayed in the website. So the function add form. First, we will initialize the const sum and the const num. And here we have the function handle change. So remember, every time this text field is changed, it's going to activate this function here. The function handle submit will be activated when we click on submit here on this part. And we have as a return. So remember, it returns how it's going to appear in the website. It's like our HTML. So in here we have a form, and this form we have the onSubmit event that this onSubmit will call the function handle submit. We have the input that have the value num. So remember num here we initialize as 0, and this input calls the function onChange called handle change. Okay, so remember when we write something here, it's going to change the text field, and when we click to submit, it will appear here the value of the sum. So sum is 0. If we add, so we click add, we are calling the function handle submit, and it's going to add. So let's add 10. We are adding 10 to the value. Okay. What do we use to store the form values? So to store the form values, we use state. I was going to say props, but remember it's a state. It's the one that we can change the values. Okay. So let's talk about lists. Web apps commonly contain repeating elements such as lists or sections, where the same DOM element is repeated with a different data set. Consider an array of string A, B, C. We need to render a list, li, remember li tag from HTML, for each item in the array. We can define a mylist component and pass it the array as a prop using a custom data attribute. So here we use data equals this attribute here, and now when the array is accessible via props, we can write the component logic. So this is the same idea. I will open here so in order for you to understand. So in here it's like we are doing a for loop inside an array. So we have an array here. We can call props.data. We can call another name if we want, because it's here where we define the name. Okay, and so the array will become from props.data. And here const list items. This map here, it's like a for loop. So we're doing a for loop in our array, and in here we have to use a unique key. It's like a demand that require from this map method. So we use here val, that it's the variable because it's unique, and here we use the li item from HTML, and here we're going to put the value. So for example, our array has A, B, C. So here we are calling the function component mylist, and here we're passing data equals this array here. So in here we are taking this value of the array, okay? So here we have the array with ABC, and this const list items, we're doing a for loop where each value will be displayed in this list item. So here we have A, then B, then C. and we were going to return an unordered list with these list items inside. That's basically what we're seeing here. If we want to add more, for example, D, E, we're passing here, okay? Or if you want to give another name, array, and here we just have to put array 2 in order to understand that these two information matches, okay? This is what I explained. So what is the output of this code? The array is 2317. In here, the const res, it's equal to this for loop where we have this function here, x equals x multiplied by 3. Okay, so console.log, remember, prints the information that we want. So in this case, we want to print the information of the index 1 of our array with this function here. So for example, here it's the index 0, this is the index 1. With this number here, we want to get the number and multiply by 3. So in this case, we are in this const res, we are creating another array, but with all of these items here multiplied by 3. So in res we have 6, 9, 3, and 21. In console.log, we want to output the first index, the index 1 of our array res. Remember that in computing, in coding, programming, we start in the index 0, so in this case it's 3. 3 multiplied by 3, it's 9. Okay? Perfect. Keys. Each element is a list. In a list must have a key attribute. Keys act as a unique identity, identifying each element. Usually these are IDs from your data or can be auto-generated indexes. For example, we have here val and index. Index in this case, it's the key. So key index, and we're going to put here the value. Okay, it's the same idea. It's just one thing for us to know more, but just follow the path here. The user object contains an ID and a name property. Given an array of user objects called R, create a list of names where each element's key is represented by the ID. So const users R, in this case we're using map, okay, where user is the input here, and we're doing an li with the key, where key it's user dot id, because we remember key must be unique and key is represented by the id. So here it's user dot id, and in here we want to represent what we want to represent, the name. So here we're going to use user.name. Okay. Contact manager. Now that we know how to create components, pass them data using props, and manage their data using state, let's start building our contact manager. Our contact manager will allow to view the list of contacts and add new ones to the list. So here it's the contact manager we saw in the previous tasks here. By looking at the mockup, it makes sense to have two components: add person form, a form with the text field and add button, this part here, and a people list, a list of contacts, is this part here. Remember the concept of separation of concepts, so this is the idea. We have two parts here, the form and displaying the contacts. So let's create these components. So the add person form function component, uses state to manage the value of the text field. So here we create this const person and we set it as empty because we don't want to have anything right when we're going to add a new content. So this is empty, okay? We have a function handle change when we write something, it's going to change the text field. The function handle submit, when we click the button, it's going to happen something we want. We return the HTML part. So in here we have a form that calls the onSubmit function. On the onSubmit event calls the handle submit function. We have the input. That onChange event is going to call the function handle change. And we have the submit button, okay? It's important to understand that this prevent default, it's a function that JavaScript has to prevent the page to keep submitting, to prevent the page to reload. For now, we just prevent the default behavior when the form is submitted, okay? People list received an array representing the context and renders a list on the page. So here it's the function people's list component, the function component people's list, where we get the array props.data. Remember how we get the array? And here we have this for loop in the array and displays these list items. That it's going to do this part here, okay? And now we can render our components on the page and include some initial data. So here we are creating the array that will be passed. And here, to connect the two components in one page, we create a div and we call the two component functions, okay? And if we try here on StackBlitz, we will see the same image that we saw in the solo learn. If my internet help me, just a second, take it easy. Okay, given an array of posts, create a div element for each post object. So here we have to put map, okay, because we are doing a for loop. And in here we want to create a div element, okay? Sharing state. Right now our add person form is independently keeps its state. How can we add a new contact to our people list then when the form is submitted? To accomplish that, we need to share the state between the components. We can do this by lifting the state up to a parent component. This means that the parent component will hold the data that needs to be shared between the components. In our case, that is the contacts list. Let's create a parent component called Contact Manager, which includes the add person form and people list as child component and holds the contact list in its state. So the idea is, the past code that we saw about Contact Manager, we couldn't submit a new value. If we write something, when we click the button, it did anything because we couldn't connect the information in our website. So the idea is to create another function component to put these two function components that we created before, and in this case we can use the data in both of these components. So when we update in one, it will appear in the other. So it's like a global variable in this case. So we are creating a global variable called contacts, and it's going to be used in people's list and in add person form. How can data flow in React? From child component to parent component, from both parents to child and from child to parent, from parent component to child component. Okay? Adding a contact. Now we can create an add person function to our contact manager component to add a new person to our contact state array. So we create this function add person inside the contact manager, where we can set, it's like we add new elements in our array. So we already have an array of contacts, and this add person is going to include a new one every time we submit the form. But how we're going to call this function for our child add person form component, where the data for the new person is stored. Just like we pass down data using props, React allows us to pass down functions references. So here, for example, remember we have the add person form. Now we can add as an input for this function component the handle submit event, and set this handle submit event to be call the add person function that is going to handle how to include this new person in the contact list. Okay, similar to passing the contact list to our people's list component, we pass down the add person function to our add person form using a props called handle submit. So it's the same idea as we did in here. Okay, so we can not only send variables but also functions. Now our people list can call the handle submit function that it receives when the form is submitted to add a new person to the list. Okay, let's see if now we can add my contact in the contact manager, Giovanna Proença, and now we can add. So this is the base of our to-do app, for example. Okay, the parent component uses the following code to pass down its calculate function. Child do stuff equals calculate. How can the child component call that function? So we use props dot do stuff equals calculate. Okay. Summary. An important takeaway from this lesson is that props can be used to pass down not only state but also functions that may manipulate the state. This way we are able to store the application state in the parent and allow its child components to use and manipulate the state. Now, when our app is fully functional, we can add some CSS styles and a check to prevent creation of blank contacts. But this is not the scope of our course, so CSS we're going to see in the next weeks. So by now we're done with what we were to our purpose. Okay, so which of the following is used to pass down information from parent components to child component? So it's props. Okay, continue. Nice. Let's do our quiz to finish the React part, and then we do the Redux. The pattern that allows developers to break different functionalities into smaller pieces is called allows developers to break different functionalities into smaller pieces. It's called separation of concerns. Okay? Fill in the blanks to complete the class component. Class hello world extends react.component. The name of here we have to do a render, right? And check. Perfect. Use effect can combine which of the following lifecycle methods? So it combine component did update, component did mount, and component did unmount also. Oh, sorry, I forgot to put, and component will unmount. Okay, the three that we can do on class component. Rearrange the code to render the comment component on the page. So we want to render react DOM.render. This is we first have to declare the component we want to input we want to render. Then in React DOM.render we call this component, and then because it's the first input and the second input, it's the element by ID. Okay? Drag and drop to create a valid controlled input field. So function compose props const text set text. So this this reminds us that we are using use state. So in here we use state. Okay. Here function handle change. Okay. Set text dot target dot value returns this input on change, and it's calling the function handle change. Okay, well done. Fill in the blanks to create a functional component search, which sets the initial value of the text field in the state using the received props. So here's a function component. Here we have this, we set the initial value of the text field in the state using the received props. So here's a props, as we are using a function component and not a class component, we just have to put here props.q in this case. Return, because we want to return something in our application. This div here, and it's done. Okay, and now the last question. Fill in the blanks to create a valid component that iterates through the received props array and return paragraph elements for each item. So remember, here's our function. Here we have to take the array that we have received from this input props, const list items, so we are doing a for loop, we use map. Here we want a paragraph element, so here we use p. And in here, we want to return a div that contains these paragraph elements. Okay? Yeah, so we finished the React part, and we're going to start the Redux. Okay? Okay, so now let's do the last part. It's about Redux. State management. In the previous module, we built a contact manager app which stores the state in the parent component and passes down to the corresponding child components. In the real world, with larger scale applications, this can get far more complex. We might have to pass down the state data multiple levels to get to the desired component. Having to pass down data to multiple levels of nested components would make it hard to understand what caused a change to the state, as there might be multiple potential components that can change the state. This would also cause a lot of redundant code, make it hard to maintain and debug the code. So let's see, how would you pass down data from the parent component to its child? So using props, introducing Redux. So Redux was created to make state management predictable, providing a single state container and strict rules on how state can be changed. Redux is a small JavaScript library and can be used with any front-end framework, such as React, Angular, and jQuery. It employs the single source of truth pattern. In short, single source of truth just refers to relocating the application state and all associated logic outside of the application, allowing any component to access the data it needs. So Redux can be used with Angular. It's true. Okay. Action and reducers. An action is just a plain JavaScript object. So here we have type, name. The code above defines an action with type and a name property. An action clearly describes why the state change happened and can be dispatched from anywhere in your app. At this point, we just have a store, which includes our state data and an object that includes some data that needs to be changed in the state. So how do we actually do the change? To tie the store and the action together, we need to write a function called a reducer. It takes state and action as arguments and returns the next state of the app. For example, so here we create a function component with inputs as state and an action. And here we have an if the action.type equals blah 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 returns something else returns another. The code above defines a simple reducer function that checks the action and returns the new state. Interesting. These concepts are basically the idea of Redux. You hold the global state in a store, define actions to describe what to change in the store, and write reducer functions to handle those actions. Fill in the blanks to create a valid action object. So here we have to use a comma, here the double dots, I don't know how to say this, and close with the curly braces. Core concepts. Redux can be described using the following principles. Single source of truth. The global state of the app is stored in a single store. State is read only. You can change the state only by dispatching actions. Actions are objects that contain information about what should be changed. And pure reducers. Reducers are functions that handle the action and return the next stage of the applications. Reducers need to be pure, meaning they cannot modify the state, they need to return a new state object. So which of the following is an attribute describing a pure function? A function that does not change its input parameters, right? As we saw before. Action can be viewed as payloads of information that send data to the store. Actions are represented by a simple JavaScript object and need to have a type property. It's what we saw before. So in the example above, we define an action with the type addContact and provide it name property as its payload. You can use any naming and structure for the other properties defining the data in the action. You can, for instance, call it payload and provide it an object with the data. Okay? So here we have to use drag and drop to create a valid action called change item with a payload object. So remember, we have to define the type that it's called change item, and here the payload. Action creators. In order to use the same action with different payloads as well as create reusable code, we can create action creators. Action creators are simple functions that return actions. So this is a function component. The action creator function takes a person parameter and uses that as the action payload. Okay. Now we can use the action creator to create multiple new contacts by passing it the corresponding data. Fill in the blanks to make this a valid action creator. So this is a function component. Here we have to return. The type is this one, and this is the payload. Okay. This part here, it's more for us to know the syntax. It's not like when we were learning about React that we can see more stuff and put the hands-on practice. So reducers are functions that handle the actions. The function takes the current state and the action as its parameter and returns the new state. A reducer can handle multiple actions, so usually it includes a switch statement for each action case. So in this example, in this function component, switch action type, and we have this default here. In the code above, our reducer function uses a switch statement to handle the appropriate actions. As a default case, it just returns the current state. So it's like having an if and else inside the component. So remember, the reducer has to be pure function, meaning it cannot modify the current state. It has to return a new object instead. So the default case is used to clear the state, return a perfume function, handle state change, handle unknown actions. when you don't know, when it's not on what you want to have. Multiple reducers. If you have more than one entity, it's typically a good idea to break them into multiple reducers functions to separate concerns. Redux gives us a method that can be used called combine reducers. This allows us to use more than one reducer so that when an action gets dispatched, the action would get run through all the reducers instead of only one. It also allows us to separate the concerns of our store state. So this is the idea of declaring a reducer. Now our contact app is combining two reducers into one. So fill in the blanks to create a valid reducer function. So it's a function, switch, case, blah blah blah. We have the default and return. Right? Perfect. Redux with React. Now that we know what Redux is, we can start building React apps that use Redux. First, we need to install blah blah blah. So this is one thing that you can see later. So I'm just going to fill in the blanks because you can read this more better alone. Install React Redux. It's just more for you to know how to install in your VS Code. Counter app. As our first example, let's build the counter app we made in the previous module. First, we need to create our action and corresponding reducer. So this is the function that we already saw before. The code above declares an action creator function named increment counter, which returns an action with type increment and the corresponding payload. Okay? So our reducer, this is the initial state, and this is the function. We call the case increment when we want to increment the thing, and when we don't know the default case, it's just to return the state. So the code above defines a reducer function which returns the new state based on the given action. We increment the count state variable by the provided num value. We also provide a default value for our state using the initial state variable. Okay, so let's put this in order. Function, this is the function, and then we have the switch, our case, this is return blah blah blah, then the default case. Okay, creating the store. To create a store, we call the create store function, which takes the reducer as its parameter. So here we have this. But how do we pass the store to our components? That is achieved using a special provider element. It makes the store available to any nested child component. So for our counter, we would have the following. Okay, we call the provider in store. We call the function counter, and then we close the provider. Provider takes the store as attribute and makes it available to its child component. It's important to import this from the respective libraries. So drag and drop from the options below to create a store. So here we have to create store first. Here we open the provider tag. Here we store the store, and voila. Connecting to the store. At this point, we have created our action, the reducer, the store, and made it available to our counter component using the provider element. In order to connect our component to the store, we need to call the connect function. The connect function returns a new component that wraps the component you passed it to it and connects it to the store using the special parameter functions. So function connect, blah blah blah, and this other. So they connect takes two optional parameters. The map states to props. This function is called every time the store state changes. It receives the state as a parameter and returns the states for the component. For example, for our counter, we need to return the count state variable. Okay. And now our component can access the count variable using its props, just as the name of the function states. It maps the states to the props. Map dispatch to props. As you may have guessed from the name, this parameter is used to map the dispatch function to props. It can be a simple object defining the function that needs to be mapped. So this is kind of new for me too, but we're here to learn together, right? This might seem a bit confusing, but it's very straightforward. Map states to props simply returns the state variable as props to our component, while map dispatch to props allows to define how we dispatch actions and make the dispatching functions available as props. Both are optional, and this is it. Fill in the blanks, blah blah blah. So let's do this function. Open the function, return, blah blah blah, and for the array of our component. State, I don't remember. Yes, this is it. Accessing the store. Inside our component, we just access the store properties using props. So we already saw this, right? Notice that we pass 1 as argument to our increment counter, making our counter increment by 1. In this case here, we can change the value to any other number, and our counter will behave as expected because we handle the increment parameter in our reducer. Now the only thing left is to call the connect function to our counter component and run it on the page. Okay, let's see this on Stack Blitz, how it works. But it's kind of the same. We saw this before, but now in a different way because we are using Reducer. It's just to refine our knowledge, so it's okay. When a component is connected to the store properties can be accessed using props. We already saw this. In our counter example, we wrote the whole code in a single source file. Usually web apps contain multiple components, reducers, and actions. To make our project more manageable, we can use separate source files and folders for component reducers and actions. For example, we can move our counter component and the action creator function to a separate counter.js file. In order to use the counter component in our index.js, we need to export it first. So this is things that we already know by importing a lot of libraries. So fill in the blanks directly, import the post component, which is located in components folder. So import post from, now we say where is located. So it's located in components folder, and this is it. Let me see. Oh, we are finishing. Thank God. Contact manager. Let's change our contact manager app to Redux. We create a separate folder and color components. In our components, we use Redux to keep the contacts list. The add person action is used to add a new person to the list. Notice that we managed the new contact form state in React, not Redux, and blah blah blah. You can see this better in details by later. Okay, so here it's drag and drop the values correctly export. So here we want to export connect, right, and the two optional functions that we can use, right? And let's do our quiz to finish this course. So which of the following are Redux principles? State can be changed only by dispatching actions. Class components cannot connect to the store. The application state is stored in a store. You can have only one component in your app. Reducers should be pure and not modify state. Okay? Which of the following is the name of the required property inside the action object? So, is required, it's the type. Okay? Fill in the blanks to create a valid action creator and reducer. So here it's a function toggle status returns. So it's an action returns type toggle data status function reduction action type. In here it's this case, the default return this other. Okay. Which of the following is used to selecting the part of the data from the store that the connected components need? So we have these two functions in connect, the map dispatch to props and map states to props. Here we want to select the part of the data from the store that the connected components need. So we use the map states to props. Fill in the blanks to create a store, pass it to a valid provider component and render it on the page. So remember React DOM render provider. Here we are using store, and here we have to put the document.get element by ID. Fill in the blanks to correct export the card complement. So here we have to use the connect map blah 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 return this and export default connect map to stage to props because we are using this, and here we use cards. Actually here it's function, sorry. And when we click, well done. Rearrange the steps to correctly define the flow in Redux when a button is clicked to change the data. So first the click handler is called because when we click the button the click handler is called because it's an event. Then an action is dispatched to store. The reducer returns the store calls the reducer function. The reducer returns the new state. The new state is saved to the store. Okay? And congratulations, we finished this course. I hope you enjoyed this content and I hope to see you in the next videos. Bye bye.